Why virtue is the Stoic secret to real freedom. Imagine a man who possesses everything the world admires. He has wealth beyond measure, estates that stretch farther than the eye can see, servants who leap at his command, and crowds who cheer his name. From the outside, he looks free, untouchable, powerful. Yet inside, he is chained. He cannot sleep without fear of losing what he has. He cannot enjoy what he owns because he is haunted by the thought that someone else might covet it, steal it, or destroy it. His appetites are endless, each satisfaction birthing a new hunger. He lashes out in anger when events don't go his way, enslaved by passions stronger than iron bars. He appears free, but he is imprisoned in his own desires. Now contrast him with another man. This one owns almost nothing. His clothes are plain, his food simple, his dwelling small. People pass by him without notice, yet his mind is serene. He does not crave more than he has, nor does he fear losing what little fortune provides. When insulted, he smiles. When misfortune strikes, he endures. When death approaches, he meets it calmly. Though he has none of the world's wealth or power, he walks through life freer than emperors. Which of these men is truly free? This is the paradox the Stoics wrestled with and the truth they uncovered. Freedom is not the ability to satisfy every whim or to command others at will. True freedom is mastery over oneself. It is the liberty no tyrant can strip away, no misfortune can rob, no chains can bind. And the Stoics declared that this freedom is found only in virtue. Every human heart longs for freedom. You can feel it in the desire to make your own choices, to live life without restraint, to escape the suffocation of control. Nations have fought wars in its name. Revolutions have torn apart kingdoms to grasp it. Even in our personal lives, we dream of the day when we will finally be free. Free from debts, free from responsibilities, free from the pressure of others. Yet, strangely, many who gain what they think will give them freedom end up more enslaved than before. Society tells us that freedom means doing whatever you want. The more options you have, the freer you are. But is this really so? Imagine someone who does whatever he pleases, chasing every desire, indulging every craving. He eats without restraint, he spends without thought, he follows every impulse of lust, anger, or greed. Is he free? Or is he in chains to the strongest master of all, his own passions? The Stoics challenged this modern illusion long before it was modern. For them, freedom was not about license, but about inner strength. Freedom was not found in the number of choices you had, but in the ability to choose rightly. They saw clearly what many still miss today, that the man who cannot control himself cannot call himself free. Virtue, they taught, is the only path to this inner liberty. Virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, temperance is the fortress of the soul, the anchor in the storm, the key that unlocks the prison of our passions. It is not enough to be unchained by others, you must be unchained within. And so the Stoics insisted that only the virtuous are truly free, for only they cannot be mastered by fear, pleasure, or fortune. By the end of this journey, you will see freedom not as the world defines it, but as the ancients lived it, unshakable, untouchable, unstealable. The kind of freedom that rests not on what happens around you, but on what you cultivate within you. This is the secret the Stoics left us. This is the freedom you are about to discover. Epictetus once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." This single statement captures the entire Stoic definition of freedom. To the Stoics, external liberties such as wealth, political rights, or the ability to travel were valuable but secondary. They could be granted and taken away by fortune or by the will of others. But inner freedom, the ability to govern one's judgments, desires and fears, was untouchable. This was the freedom they believed no tyrant could ever seize. Imagine two kinds of freedom. The first is external, the right to vote, to own property, to speak your mind, to move about as you wish. These are important and worth defending, but history has shown how fragile they are. Empires collapse, governments betray, wealth is stolen, wars erupt. The second kind of freedom is internal, the freedom to hold fast to what is right, the freedom to think clearly without being bent by fear or seduced by pleasure, the freedom to live with dignity even when the world denies you dignity. This freedom cannot be confiscated. Epictetus himself was born a slave. His master owned his body, but his mind remained his own. By exercising discipline over his thoughts and desires, he claimed a liberty that his oppressors did not have. Contrast that with a ruler who commands thousands, yet trembles with paranoia at the thought of losing power. He lashes out at rivals, torments himself with suspicion, and drowns in his own anxieties. Though he wears a crown, he is more enslaved than the servant who stands at his side. This is why the Stoics insisted that the true measure of freedom is not external condition, but internal mastery. To be free is not to live without restraint, but to live without being ruled by what is outside your control. The world's vision of freedom, both ancient and modern, often misses this truth. People equate freedom with wealth, fame, indulgence, or endless options. But these supposed freedoms often create new chains, heavier than the old ones. Consider the man who wins the lottery. At first, he thinks he is free at last. No more debt, no more worry. Yet in time, the very wealth he thought would liberate him becomes his prison. He cannot trust new friends. He is consumed with protecting what he has, and he is burdened with desires he never had before. Celebrities who seem to live without limits are often enslaved by their own image. They cannot act without fear of public judgment. They sacrifice their peace for applause, and they trade authenticity for the prison of popularity. Even dictators who wield absolute power are chained to paranoia, constantly watching for betrayal, surrounded by enemies real and imagined. Pleasure, too, deceives. Those who chase it without moderation find themselves addicted, restless, and dissatisfied. What begins as freedom to indulge becomes compulsion, and compulsion is the death of liberty. The Stoics saw that every pursuit of freedom outside of virtue collapses on itself. External freedom without inner discipline is chaos. It looks like liberty, but it is merely another form of bondage. True freedom, they argued, requires one thing above all: virtue. For only the virtuous soul can stand unshaken in fortune's storms, immune to the tyranny of desires and independent of the fickle approval of others. This is why the world's version of freedom fails, and why the Stoics' version endures. The Stoics made a bold and radical claim that shocked their contemporaries and still challenges us today. Only virtue is good, only vice is evil, and everything else is indifferent. Wealth, health, status, reputation, these things may be pleasant or painful, but they are not good in themselves. Poverty, sickness, and disgrace may be uncomfortable, but they are not evil in themselves. What matters is not what happens to you, but how you respond. Virtue is the compass that guides those responses. For the Stoics, virtue was not an abstract idea, but a way of life, a set of habits of the soul that guaranteed freedom from slavery to external forces. Virtue meant aligning your will with reason and with nature, living in harmony with what is just and wise. They defined virtue through 4 cardinal qualities: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. These were not separate options, but interwoven aspects of one unified strength. To live virtuously was to live freely, because the virtuous person could never be mastered by fear, desire, or chance. Imagine a treasure that cannot be stolen, rusted, or destroyed. Virtue is that treasure. It rests within you, safe from fortune's reach. To the Stoic, freedom does not depend on whether you live in a palace or a prison cell. Freedom depends on whether you live according to virtue. That is why a man stripped of all possessions can still live nobly, while another who has everything can still be enslaved by his passions. The secret is not in the world around you, but in the character you cultivate within. The first of these virtues is wisdom, the ability to see clearly. Wisdom is not simply collecting knowledge, but knowing what truly matters. It is the power to distinguish between what lies within your control and what lies beyond it. Without this clarity, people stumble blindly, wasting their energy on things they cannot govern and neglecting the only thing they truly command, their own mind and actions. Wisdom frees us from that blindness. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, bore the crushing weight of empire. He faced wars on the borders, plagues within the cities, and betrayals even among those closest to him. Yet in his meditations, he reminded himself daily to focus on what he could control: his thoughts, his words, his deeds. He could not dictate the movements of fate, but he could shape his response to them. This is wisdom in action. To be free, you must learn to see through the illusions that enslave others. The illusion that wealth guarantees happiness, that reputation defines worth, that fortune determines dignity. Wisdom teaches you to look deeper, to recognize that the only lasting good is virtue. And when you see the world this way, you begin to walk in freedom. You no longer waste yourself in rage at the inevitable or despair at the uncontrollable. Instead, you conserve your strength for what you can govern, your own choices. Practice wisdom daily by pausing before judgment, asking yourself, is this in my control or not? If it is, act with reason. If it is not, let it go. This habit of discernment clears away the fog of confusion and liberates the mind. In wisdom, you discover the first taste of Stoic freedom, the unshakable peace that comes from seeing reality as it is. Courage is the second pillar of virtue, and without it, wisdom cannot hold. To see clearly what must be done is one thing, but to act on it in the face of fear is another. Courage is freedom from fear's tyranny. It does not erase fear, but teaches us not to bow to it. Every human being feels fear, fear of pain, of loss, of failure, of death, but the courageous person refuses to be mastered by it. Seneca knew exile, betrayal, and the looming shadow of death. When the Emperor Nero commanded him to end his own life, Seneca obeyed calmly, speaking words of comfort to his weeping friends, even as he bled. His courage did not consist in feeling no fear, but in refusing to let fear dictate his final moments. To live with courage is to accept that suffering, hardship, and death are woven into life, and to move forward anyway. Without courage, a man becomes a slave to avoidance, constantly shrinking from challenges, constantly compromised by the desire for safety. But with courage, he becomes free to live fully, unafraid of the shadows that haunt others. Practical steps toward courage begin with training the mind to rehearse adversity. The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, premeditation of evils. Imagine in advance the difficulties you may face, and you weaken fear's surprise. Another practice is voluntary discomfort. Sleep on the ground, fast for a day, endure the cold. When you choose hardship willingly, the hardships life imposes lose their power. Courage is freedom because it breaks the grip of fear. When fear no longer controls you, you are free to act in accordance with reason and virtue, no matter what storms rise around you. Justice, the third virtue, is the harmony of living rightly with others. It is freedom from the chains of selfishness, greed, and cruelty. Justice demands that we respect others, give what is due, and serve the common good. To the Stoics, freedom was not license to trample others in pursuit of private gain. That kind of freedom enslaves both the oppressor and the oppressed. True freedom is the liberty to act fairly, to live in accordance with the order of nature, where each person is part of a greater whole. Marcus Aurelius, though emperor of Rome, reminded himself constantly that he was not born for himself alone, but for the service of humankind. His position could have made him a tyrant, yet he strove to be a servant. Injustice, the Stoics taught, is its own prison. The tyrant who seizes power by cruelty can never rest, for he is surrounded by those who hate and fear him. He must guard himself constantly, suspect everyone, and live in perpetual anxiety. He appears powerful, but he is chained to suspicion and violence. The just person, by contrast, walks freely. He has no need to fear the judgment of others because he acts rightly. He is not enslaved to greed because he does not covet what belongs to another. He is not enslaved to hatred because he seeks the common good. Justice frees us from the prison of self-centeredness, opening the soul to harmony with others and peace within ourselves. When you live justly, you are not at war with the world or with your own conscience. You move through life with the freedom of one who has nothing to hide, nothing to fear, and nothing to regret. Temperance is the final of the 4 cardinal virtues, and it is the key to freedom from the tyranny of desire. To live without temperance is to be ruled by cravings that never end, each promise of satisfaction giving birth to new hunger. The glutton is never free, for his stomach is his master. The drunkard is never free, for the cup commands his will. The one who chases pleasures without restraint finds himself chained, pulled endlessly from one indulgence to the next. The Stoics taught that temperance does not mean rejecting pleasure, but mastering it. The wise man can enjoy wine but does not need it. He can partake in luxury but is just as content with simplicity. In this, he shows his freedom. The one who can take or leave what fortune provides is untouchable, for nothing owns him. Freedom, then, is not in having all you desire, but in desiring only what you can rightly have. Seneca once remarked that it is not the man who has little, but the man who craves more, who is poor. By practicing temperance, you invert this law. You become rich with less because you are free from need. The Stoics often trained themselves through voluntary acts of restraint. They fasted, wore coarse clothing, and endured discomfort not to punish themselves, but to prove mastery over desire. When fortune took comforts away, they were already prepared. Temperance grants liberty by cutting the strings of appetite that bind most people like puppets. A person who can enjoy without clinging, who can abstain without bitterness, walks in a freedom that indulgence can never provide. Virtue does not exist in theory alone. It is tested and proven in the furnace of real life. Freedom of the soul is not shown when life is easy, but when challenges press in. Epictetus compared life to the arena of athletes. A wrestler's strength is proven not in rest, but in struggle, not in avoiding the contest, but in meeting it. In the same way, the soul's freedom is revealed not when fortune smiles, but when it strikes. Anyone can seem free when everything goes his way, but the true test is when he suffers loss, insult, hardship, or fear. The Stoic sage does not retreat from trial, but welcomes it as a chance to exercise his freedom. Misfortune becomes training, adversity becomes proof. When you lose wealth yet retain calm, you show that wealth never owned you. When you are slandered but remain steady, you show that reputation never chained you. When you face death with composure, you prove that even mortality cannot imprison you. Each hardship becomes a mirror, revealing whether your freedom rests on externals or on virtue. This is why the Stoics taught that every trial is a hidden gift, for it gives you the chance to display the only freedom that matters. To practice virtue in action is to claim your liberty. No one can grant it, no one can revoke it, and no circumstance can deny it. Life is not a retreat from battle, but the battleground where true freedom is won. Power, wealth, and pleasure, these are the false freedoms that lure countless souls into slavery. Power seems to promise control, the ability to bend the world to your will. Yet those who seize it often become prisoners of it. A ruler who must constantly guard against rivals, who cannot sleep for fear of betrayal, is no more free than a captive in chains. Wealth seems to promise independence, the ability to buy what you want and live as you please. Yet those who clutch their riches are bound by worry, chained to possessions that own them more than they own their possessions. They fear loss, they crave more, and they are never satisfied. Pleasure seems to promise liberation from toil and pain. Yet those who make pleasure their master are soon enslaved by their cravings, each indulgence deepening their bondage. The Stoics saw these illusions clearly. They did not condemn power, wealth, or pleasure in themselves, but they warned that if you treat them as the foundation of freedom, they will betray you. Without virtue, all these pursuits collapse into prisons. True freedom does not come from having more, but from needing less. It does not come from bending others to your will, but from bending your will to what is right. Only virtue can turn these externals into tools rather than chains. Power used justly can serve, wealth used wisely can bless, pleasure enjoyed with temperance can refresh. But without virtue, each one becomes another name for slavery. This paradox is perhaps the sharpest edge of Stoic teaching. Slaves can be free, and free men can be slaves. Epictetus himself was born into bondage. His body belonged to another, his movements restricted, his labor commanded. By every external measure, he was unfree. Yet in his mind, he claimed a freedom that no chains could touch. He taught his students that while a master could strike his body, imprison his flesh, or command his tasks, no one could force his thoughts. His reason, his virtue, his inner freedom, these were his own. By contrast, Nero, the emperor of Rome, held absolute power over millions. He commanded armies, wealth, and the lives of his subjects, yet he was enslaved to his own passions, his rage, his lust, his fear. He killed those closest to him, including his teacher Seneca, because he could not master himself. He wore a crown of gold, but lived in terror, suspicion, and cruelty. In the eyes of the Stoics, it was not Epictetus, but Nero who was the true slave. This inversion unsettles us because it strips away the illusions we cling to. Freedom is not a matter of birth, status, or circumstance. It is a matter of the soul. A slave who has mastered his desires and his fears is freer than a king chained to his vices. This is why the Stoics insisted that no one can make you free and no one can make you a slave, except yourself. The Stoics understood that fortune rules the external world with a hand both generous and cruel. One day it lifts you up, the next it casts you down. Health can be lost overnight, wealth can vanish in a single storm, reputation can crumble with a whisper. To anchor your freedom in fortune is to build your house upon sand. Seneca warned that fortune gives nothing truly her own, for she merely lends, and she reclaims without notice. Those who tie their happiness to her gifts live in constant fear of her withdrawal, but those who ground their lives in virtue stand unmoved when fortune turns. A man may be stripped of wealth, yet if he retains his character, he loses nothing essential. A woman may be exiled, yet if she carries wisdom and courage within her, she remains free. Even death, fortune's final blow, cannot enslave the one who sees it as natural and not evil. Freedom from fortune means refusing to stake your peace on what lies outside your control. It means greeting her gifts with gratitude, but never clinging to them. Enduring her losses with dignity, but never despairing. The chains of fortune fall away when you see that her power ends at the edge of your soul. She can touch your body, your property, your place in the world, but not your reason, not your virtue, not your freedom. If fortune enslaves many through her unpredictability, others are bound just as tightly by the opinions of those around them. Most people live as prisoners of what others think. They strive for praise, tremble at criticism, and shape their lives around the shifting winds of approval. In such slavery, every word and every glance becomes a master's whip. The Stoics urged freedom from this bondage. What others think of you lies outside your control. Therefore, it is indifferent. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself again and again that the applause of the crowd and the scorn of enemies were both fleeting, both meaningless, compared to living in accord with reason and justice. To live by the judgment of others is to hand them the keys to your soul. True freedom comes when you withdraw that power and return it to where it belongs, yourself. Consider the man who cannot bear insult without rage, or the woman who cannot endure disapproval without despair. They seem strong, but they are fragile, enslaved to every tongue around them. Contrast them with the one who acts rightly and lets judgment fall where it may. Such a person walks free, no longer a puppet dancing to the strings of reputation. This does not mean despising others, but placing their opinions in their proper place, beneath the authority of your own reason. When you act from virtue, you need no witness. You are your own judge, and in that judgment lies freedom. The greatest chain binding humanity is the fear of death. It is the shadow behind all other fears, the final master to which so many bow. People hoard wealth because they dread losing life's comforts. They chase fame because they long for a kind of immortality. They cling desperately to health, beauty, and status because each loss reminds them of their mortality. But the Stoics taught that freedom requires facing death directly and stripping it of its terror. Death, they said, is not an evil, but a part of nature. It is the closing of a play, the falling of a curtain, the return of the body to the elements from which it came. Marcus Aurelius reflected often that death is woven into the order of the universe, and that fearing it is as senseless as fearing that a leaf must fall in autumn. Epictetus taught that death should not be feared, for it lies beyond our control. What lies within our control is how we meet it, with fear and trembling, or with calm acceptance. Seneca went further, urging that to learn how to live well is to learn how to die well. The one who accepts death as natural lives, unburdened by its shadow. He is free to act with courage, to love without clinging, to embrace each day as a gift rather than a possession. To be free from the fear of death is to be free indeed, for then no threat remains. Life itself becomes sweeter when you cease to grasp it desperately, and you find liberty in the simple act of being present in the moment that is given. If freedom rests on virtue, then it must be practiced daily, not merely admired in theory. The Stoics left us practical exercises to train the soul toward liberty. In the morning, they urged reflection. Remind yourself of the trials you may face, the people who may insult you, the obstacles that may arise. By preparing your mind, you disarm surprise and walk into the day with steadiness. In the evening, they counseled self-examination. Ask yourself, what did I do well? Where did I fall short? How can I act more in line with reason tomorrow? This habit builds the muscles of virtue just as physical exercise strengthens the body. They practiced voluntary discomfort to prove mastery over desire, sleeping on hard beds, eating simple meals, exposing themselves to cold or hunger. Such acts remind you that you can endure far more than you think, and that comfort is not the master of your will. Another powerful exercise was negative visualization, imagining the loss of what you hold dear, not to sink into despair, but to sharpen gratitude and to loosen attachment. When you picture losing health, loved ones, or possessions, you learn to cherish them rightly while they remain and release them when they are gone. Gratitude itself was central to Stoic freedom. To thank fortune for every gift, large or small, is to live in abundance regardless of circumstance. These daily practices train the mind to stand free from fortune, desire, and fear. They are not lofty ideals, but practical tools, a discipline that can be woven into any life. The more you practice, the more you discover that freedom is not found tomorrow after you achieve or acquire something, but here and now in the choices you make each day. Modern life offers new forms of chains, subtler than the shackles of emperors and tyrants, but no less binding. Technology, comparison, and consumption enslave countless souls who think themselves free. Consider the endless scroll of social media. Each swipe feeds comparison. Each like or comment stirs a craving for validation. People live tethered to the opinions of strangers, measuring their worth by numbers on a screen. This is not freedom, but bondage disguised as entertainment. Consumer culture deepens the trap. Advertisements whisper that you are incomplete without the next purchase, the newest device, the latest fashion. The more you acquire, the more you crave, for desire has no end. Technology, too, distracts rather than liberates when it pulls you from presence into constant noise. The phone in your pocket may connect you to the world, but it also chains you to notifications, robbing you of stillness. The Stoics would see in all this the same old slavery in new clothing. To be free in the modern age is to practice the same virtues they taught. Wisdom teaches us to see through the illusions of marketing and comparison. Courage allows us to step away from the crowd and live by reason instead of popularity. Justice reminds us to use technology to serve others rather than exploit them. Temperance keeps us from being ruled by consumption, teaching us to own things without letting them own us. The world's chains may change their form, but the key remains the same: virtue. Without it, the modern person with infinite options is more enslaved than the ancient slave with none. With it, even amid distractions and pressures, you can walk freely, untouched by the currents that sweep so many away. Yet freedom through virtue is not without its cost. It demands discipline, sacrifice, and the willingness to walk a path many will not understand. It is far easier to drift with desire, to chase fortune, to conform to the opinions of the crowd. Virtue requires effort, restraining anger when it burns, refusing indulgence when it tempts, speaking truth when silence would be safer, acting justly when selfishness would be easier. To live by virtue is to swim against the stream, and the current is strong. But though the cost is great, the reward is greater. For in exchange, you receive the one gift no world, no ruler, no fortune can give or take: true freedom. You gain peace of mind, no longer pulled apart by craving and fear. You gain strength, unbroken by loss or misfortune. You gain dignity, living not as a slave to impulse, but as a master of yourself. Seneca said that virtue is hard, but once attained, It is the only thing that makes life worth living. The struggle itself is proof of freedom, for in each act of virtue you break another chain. The cost of virtue may seem heavy at first, but over time you see it is not a burden but a liberation. The chains fall away, and what remains is the soul, standing upright, unshaken, free. External freedom is fragile, built on foundations that can crumble in a moment. Governments rise and fall, fortunes vanish, reputations shift like shadows, and even health slips quietly away. If your liberty depends on these, then your freedom is only borrowed, and it can be taken from you at any time. But the Stoics showed us a freedom that nothing can touch, the freedom that rests in virtue. Virtue cannot be stolen by thieves, cannot be destroyed by fire, cannot be broken by chains. It belongs entirely to you, and in it lies a fortress stronger than any wall. This freedom is not about doing whatever you want, but about being unshakable in who you are. It is not license but mastery, not escape but endurance. When you live with wisdom, courage, justice and temperance, you carry freedom within you wherever you go. No tyrant can enslave it, no storm can drown it, no death can erase it. The call is simple yet profound. Claim the liberty that is already yours. Do not wait for fortune to favor you, or for circumstances to align, or for others to grant you permission. You may not control your wealth, your status, or even your lifespan, but you can control your virtue. And if you can control your virtue, then you can control your freedom. Every insult is a chance to prove patience, every trial an arena to show courage, every temptation a chance to practice temperance, every decision a moment to live with justice. This is the secret of the Stoics. Freedom is not found in the world outside, but in the soul within. So let the world chase its illusions. Let others cling to chains they call liberty. You now know what freedom truly is and where it truly lives. Walk in it, practice it, guard it. For once you discover that virtue is the root of freedom, you will never again bow to fear, to desire, or to fortune. You will stand free, not someday in a perfect future, but here, now, in this very moment.